I'm going to go ahead and start. So in your that's fine. In your PowerPoint, the first slide is really just an introduction to you all as the governing body, your names and which wards you represent. More detailed contact information is always available for each one of our elected officials at the website at missionks.org. Then next in your PowerPoint presentation, there is just an overall organizational chart for the city. And this, I think, just helps provide a sense of the structure that we're operating under, ultimately with all of the city, myself and the city staff, responsible to you as the elected officials and you all, you know, being responsible to and responsive to the residents and constituents in our community. This demonstrates a lot of the things where we have appointed officials and contract services. So it's just a helpful kind of roadmap to the organization. So we are on slide number 4 when you get there. Okay, thank you. So why do we budget? Gives us the opportunity annually to identify priorities, goals, and objectives, and to identify the revenue mix that's necessary to support both the operational service delivery or ongoing service delivery and the infrastructure investment that are part and parcel of the city's larger budget. It's a tool that can help us communicate those priorities, goals, and objectives with the public. It helps us plan and project future needs and challenges, although we are required to budget on an annual basis. We do, particularly in our capital improvement program, look at a 5-year horizon and beyond, just to be able to anticipate needs and or challenges. And we have to submit each year a balanced budget to that is required by state statute, and that has to be submitted to the county clerk by October 1st of each year in order to certify tax rates for the tax bills that will go out for property owners in all of the communities. Next slide, please. We've talked a lot through the budget process about where do these priorities, goals, and objectives come from. And they really come from a variety of sources, from our citizens, from you as the elected officials, from our board and commission members, from city staff. A lot of that can be based on feedback that we receive through a Direction Finder survey, which is a statistically valid citizen survey that we will be conducting later this in 2025. We've conducted it on a 4-year cycle here in Mission. We have public meetings. The council often conducts goal setting retreats, regular and ongoing constituent contact, regional priorities or programs that we're aware of through our involvement in networking activities, our volunteer boards and commissions who are very actively engaged in areas related to sustainability and parks recreation in particular, and then staff just from our professional networking best practices. So all of these things and all of these resources funnel into our process of trying to establish and priorities and allocate resources appropriately. Next slide, please. So several ongoing priorities that we have talked about, and the list hasn't moved much in the last several years. Always at the top of the list, particularly in the Direction Finder survey, are streets, so residential streets, but also our arterial and collector streets. Tied to that is also a focus on pedestrian-focused or streets that will accommodate multimodal transportation. A priority and a commitment to sustainability and implementation of strategies coming from the Regional Climate Action Plan. Commercial code enforcement was specifically identified in a retreat, but I would say code enforcement in general, both in our residential and commercial areas. Park planning and implementation, small business initiatives, improving the cost recovery for the community center, gateway, zoning code and building code updates, and just generally managing development activity throughout the community. Next slide, please. So those kind of form the umbrella that we're working on under And then as we've gone through the budget process this year, we've really looked more specifically at what needs do we have identified that are really coming in the next 3 to 5 years. And so I know this font is a little small, but always at the top of the list is a commitment to maintaining high quality core service delivery, um, focusing on those community priorities, many of which we just went through, maintaining recommended levels of reserves so that we are not needing to be reactionary to economic changes. Infrastructure maintenance, both street and stormwater in particular, police department, and a city hall facility. We've talked a lot about that for several years, but more specifically in this year's budget process. Outdoor park improvements. We've made some significant progress in our outdoor parks in the last couple of years. Recruitment and retention challenges that we're facing really across all of our departments, but with a particular emphasis in law enforcement. Just a continuing need to make sure that we've got the vehicles, equipment, and technology, as we struggle with some technology, to again support that high quality service delivery, and then completing the zoning code update and funding equipment reserves, again, trying to get ahead and keeping up with the needs that we have in those categories. So really, the question is, how do we best stay positioned to continue the success that we've had? The next slide is really just one we shared in a recent budget presentation that just sort of illustrates we're reaching, well, we've probably gone beyond the critical point in terms of effective lifespan of this building, both in terms of just structural condition and or space needs. And that just highlights something that we've got to have some very serious conversations about. Next slide, please. This is a slide that you've seen, and you're going to see it again later in this this presentation with some things that we've done as a part of this budget process. But generally, as stewards of the public resources, we have to really look for and find that appropriate balance between revenues and expenses. So when we're balancing the budget, just like we do at home, we have to look at reducing expenses, delaying purchases or projects, privatizing or outsourcing services, discontinuing services or programs, holding positions vacant. We really try not to lay employees off, but if we have attrition or positions that become vacant, we always have a conversation about the budgetary impact and operational impact as well. And then in terms of raising revenues, we look very hard for other people's money, grants, county, state, federal dollars. Those are not generally as available for general fund operating expenses as they are for our larger scale infrastructure projects. But we will turn over any and every rock that we can find. Looking at increases in fees and charges, and then potentially increases in taxes, which could be in the form of either sales tax or property tax. So next slide, please. So really at the end of the day, it's all a matter of time and money. So as we make these decisions, what do we need to consider? We need to think about quality of life for our residents and our businesses. We need to think about affordability, impacts on our service delivery, changes in federal, state, and local laws, which could impact positively or negatively our budgets, unanticipated events, storms that bring down a lot of limbs and require us to do curbside collection, or stormwater failures, or sinkholes, or other things. And then long-term sustainability, both from a fiscal and a physical standpoint. So we want to make sure that we're positioning ourselves to be financially responsible, but then also just in terms of the assets, whether those are buildings, vehicles, equipment, investments in our outdoor parks, that we're making investments that will have a long lifespan and be sustainable into the future. So then, as you know, the general fund, next slide, please, is we spend a lot of time really talking about our general fund, which is our operating fund. It covers all of the operating departments and services, and some limited capital. Is the largest single budget in the city's 19 plus or minus funds each year. It's where we maintain our reserve funds, which is 25% of fund balance goal of annual revenues in the general fund. We build it conservatively, both from a revenue and an expense standpoint, and we continue to monitor that through final budget adoption, and really we're monitoring it all year long through our monthly interim financials and beyond. And one of the things that we talked about is, and we'll talk a little bit in more detail, is one of the things this year where we focused is that we've had some structural imbalances that have kind of known were sort of pending and growing out there because of large transfers that we've made out of the general fund, particularly for our street program since 2016. And so I think it was kind of time, those have been masked by some of the federal dollars that came out, whether those were CARES dollars or ARPA funds that were available through the COVID pandemic and some other things that allowed us to sort of ride the wave a little longer than we might have otherwise. But as you all know, in our previous budget discussions, it's kind of time to look at addressing those structural imbalances. So next slide, please. So general fund revenues, as proposed in the 2026 budget, general fund revenues are $16.3 million. Broken out in this chart, you can see the largest portion of that comes from property tax. That is in part because these numbers include the $3.5 mil property tax increase that we've been discussing. A lot of times that property tax revenue number has been second behind our sales tax number. So sales tax is the next largest. The sales tax at $4.4 million. That's simply city sales and use tax that is available to the general fund. Also in the intergovernmental revenue category, we have the portion of county sales and use tax revenues that come to us. Next, you have Parks and Recreation revenues at just shy of $2 million annually. Franchise fees at a little over $1 million. Fines and fee revenue, and then all at $632,000, and then everything else that we collect: plan review, building permit fees, occupational licenses, anything that we're charging a fee for comprises that last slice of the pie at a little over $600,000. So 95% of our revenues come from property tax, sales tax, franchise fees, Parks and Recreation revenues, and fines and fees. What we're seeing, and we've discussed, is that sales and use tax performance is slowing. We've always been conservative in estimating that, but we have probably been even a little bit more conservative in building that in the 2026 budget, not knowing what the economy will hold in the next few years. We continue to see recovery for community center revenues as we implement recommendations from the 2023 feasibility study, trying to reach our cost recovery goals. And as I mentioned, this revenue chart is built with that $3.5 million increase included. Next slide, please. This is really, again, just a very quick recap of the general fund revenues. Sales and use taxes, as I mentioned, are relatively flat. We've had large refunds of particularly use tax, kind of bumping up against almost $1 million that have been refunded over the last 3.5 years. Those $300,000 or more hits at a time have significant impacts on our budget. As I mentioned, growth for 2026 is conservative. We haven't talked about sales tax increases in this budget, other than to say we still have about 0.25% remaining in our statutory authority. And that's something that we think about. We've had some limited conversation around that with the City Hall or public safety facility. Potentially, one of the things that, as we look at sales taxes, we have a pull factor, which is such, that is, how many people are we pulling into our community to spend their sales tax dollars? And so we are bringing more people into our community than are going outside of our community to send their sales tax dollars. So that's something that benefits us when we look at potentially using sales tax revenues. And then the sales tax impacts of the multifamily projects. I think the example that we used specifically was for the Millhouse project, once kind of up and fully functional, it would generate an additional $30,000 to $35,000 in sales tax revenue. Community center revenues, as you can see, we've steadily been improving since 2022. We have a cost recovery goal of 70% or better. In 2025, we increased membership fees and we reopened the facility on Sundays with enhanced programming. We continue to look for savings and increased revenues. We've been on the expense side there impacted by just increases in part-time salaries to be competitive and to be able to stay staffed and keep the facility open, whether that's the community center or the outdoor pool. Next slide, please. Franchise fees are what we collect 5% of gross receipts on our utilities. Those can be impacted by things like weather and rate increases, additional density as we see some of these multifamily projects coming online. Also, generally are going to generate more in franchise revenues for us. And then fines and forfeitures are those things relating or resulting from traffic enforcement, code enforcement, or other violations of municipal court. Next slide. Property tax is kind of the big one. We've had a focus. We've seen about a 4% increase in our underlying assessed valuation from last year to this year. Our average growth over the last 5 years, increase in assessed valuation has been 6.2%. In the last 5 years, we've experienced a high of 11% and low in a couple of years of 4%. And for the 2026 budget, a 1 mil will generate about $231,000 in property tax revenues. So this really, we've talked a lot about the increases that we've seen in assessed valuation. And I'll talk a little bit more about the specific what's happened with the mill levy on the next slide.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Is there any way to do an assessment to find out how many properties based on their tax value are in arrears on their tax right now?
No.
Not paid property tax, either they're in arrears or they're in some kind of litigation or something, so we're not getting tax from them.
Well, we recently received some information from the county about properties that are delinquent enough that they're preparing to move them to a tax sale. We typically do not have that information. Now, I will note, and I noted on this slide, we are aware of several of our large properties, commercial properties in particular, who have tax appeals pending before the Board of Tax Appeals. We don't have hearing dates set on the majority of those. Those are often multiple year appeals. And so any resulting determinations or decisions coming out of that could certainly impact the underlying valuation. And then those large properties are our tax collection rate in general is 95% or better, typically closer to 97 or 98%. But it is the large properties that can certainly have a much more significant impact should they have a reduction or increase in value. Next slide, please. So as I've mentioned, this slide just talks a little bit about the revenue neutral rate and the proposed 2026 mill levy. So our current mill rate in the 2025 budget is 18.507. In the 2026 proposed budget, or at least what we have published, the maximum mill levy that we could approve for 2026 is a 3.5 mil increase, taking the mill levy to 22.007. So this graph just kind of talks, and we've talked at length in the past about how, because of some fluctuations in valuation and some of the state budgeting forms, we've actually, between 2020 and 2023, saw a decline, just kind of a small eroding each year of our actual mill rate. So for the 2024 budget, the council approved about a 2.1 mil increase. And then you can see this is the recommendation for the 3.5 mils. think everybody's familiar with the revenue neutral philosophy that we've been working under for the last several years. That is the mill levy. The county provides you with the mill levy that will allow you to collect exactly the same amount of taxes that you collected in the previous year. So our revenue neutral rate for the 2025 tax year, 2026 budget was calculated at 17.805 mils. So really what that means is there's no allowance for CPI growth, increasing labor or commodity costs, growth attributable to new construction. And so we're kind of paying for this year's services with the same amount of money that we had last year. And one of the things we'll talk about a little bit more, I mean, whether it's commodities, personnel has been a big driver in those cost increases. So as we went through the budget process and the conversations that we've had since April, really most specifically in late June and early July, we looked at a variety of different mill levy scenarios, really starting anywhere from about a 2 mil increase all the way up to 5, at least we ran scenarios. And as we talked about that, thinking about what would it take to balance the current year's budget, as well as start to position us for addressing some of these longer term structural imbalances that we're seeing. So we kind of landed when the council passed the resolution setting the maximum mill levy under the revenue neutral strategy at 3.5 mils. The next slide, please, sorry. This slide talks a little bit about the total increase in property tax is a little over $800,000. What we have to remember is that anytime we have a new revenue source, whether it's property tax, sales tax, you name it, we take 25% of that off the top and put it in a reserve fund. And then there's an additional reduction that we see for TIF projects that have been approved. So in looking at the actual impact or the funds available for operating expenditures with a 3.5 mil increase, the net available for the budget is really only about $525,000. So we looked at, with the mill increase for the cost of an average homeowner, the cost of the average home, according to the county appraiser and Mission for this year, is just slightly over $350,000. So with the current mill levy, that would be a property tax of about $748 a year. With the 3.5 mil increase, you're looking at $890 a year. And again, this is one snapshot of that on that value. So it will vary based on the assessed valuation of each home, but about a $12 a month increase over the current. So why has the council been considering the mill levy increase? We've talked a lot about the potential threats that we have to home rule authority each year as a part of the legislative session. We deal with a lot of proposals, imposing even stricter and more stringent requirements. We feel very strongly that the 9 of you who are elected to sit here and make decisions about the budget know best because you are talking to your constituents, you're doing your citizen surveys. I've never in my 30+ year history seen a city council who takes a mill levy increase or any sort of tax or fee increase lightly. But we want to make sure that you all have the ability to maintain that to address the priorities in your community. We've had a desire and we have been aggressively pursuing community priorities, whether that's in streets or parks in particular. And then we have larger needs in the future that might require bonding, for example, a facility. So we want to think about if we are going to be able to move forward with that, we need a revenue source for debt repayment. What other options are we considering? We've talked a lot, and you will see conversations still this year about reviewing or revamping the annual street program based on sort of data that we will collect and update. We talked a little bit about the sales tax increase. We've kind of talked about and moved on from that in this year's budget. Program or service cuts and fee increases, and we've committed to looking at overall fee increase adjustments coming back to the council in the first quarter of 2026 on our fee schedule. Next slide. Please go back one if you would, please. Other way. So these are a couple of snapshots from the 2021 Direction Finder survey, looking at where residents said they would be willing to make increased investments to make improvements. And so this one was looking specifically at increased investment for public safety or city buildings. So 35% willing to invest, 32% willing to invest $6 to $10 a month, 35 willing to invest $11 to $20 more a month. So we don't have any specific proposals, but again, we always try to use that citizen survey as a benchmark for testing that we're, continuing to align with what the community's priorities are. And then we've talked, next slide. And then we've talked a lot about the community rebate program that has been in place since 2004, but it was, the income eligibility thresholds were changed in 2024 to make it available to more folks. But this is an opportunity for those who do qualify from an income standpoint, that they can receive a 100% rebate of utility franchise fees, city property taxes, and a 50% rebate of the solid waste utility fee and the stormwater utility fees. And so, as I mentioned, in 2024, we modified the income eligibility threshold. And so we will continue to promote that program actively to our community. So next slide, please. This is one, is this kind of the year, 2025, as we talk about the 2026 budget, the perfect storm? We've got the structural imbalances we've been sort of watching. We're planning for needs for facilities. We continue to work on residential streets and stormwater. We want to continue to upgrade our outdoor parks and implement the recommendations from the various studies that we've taken. We've successfully leveraged, not numbers wrong, it's actually more than $21 million in the last 5 years to help stretch our own resources, primarily, as I mentioned, for street and stormwater projects. But personnel, budget savings, strong revenue performance in some categories has kind of helped delay the immediacy of rebalancing, but that's where we find ourselves in 2026. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, I said you would see this slide again. You may recall that the things identified in red were those things that we brought to you in the first draft of the 2026 budget. We'd already asked the departments to reduce expenses by $200,000. We had delayed some purchases. And we really didn't identify anything to be privatized or discontinued. And then the things in green are things that we have done since the original budget presentation. So we've gone back to the departments and we've asked them to reduce their expenses by an additional $200,000. So all in, they've reduced expenses, non-personnel, so contractual and commodity expenses, just shy of about the equivalent of 2 mils in the budget. And then we, although we budget for full staff and we adjust at mid-year or through this budget process to take advantage of savings, we have reduced the number of full-time employees in the 2026 general fund budget by 2 positions, both of those in the police department, 1 community service officer position, which is currently vacant, and a crime analyst position, which we've had in the budget for several years, never had filled, so it's been vacant. And then, as I mentioned, at least in the general fund, we have limited availability to kind of pursue other people's money. We'll be bringing the fee schedule updates back in the first quarter of 2026. And then, as we've talked about, the numbers that are presented is representative of that 3.5 mil increase. Next
Laura,
slide. Yes.
Laura, do you want to just briefly address what categories those fees are, right? And that's large projects that would be paying.
So,
Those
it could be anything. I mean, it could be, there's fees that are charged for occupational licensing for all of our businesses. The bigger categories are things related on the development side. So plan review, building permitting fees, which haven't been adjusted for quite some time. So yeah, so the people who are coming in and using those services and having those impacts in the community would bear the user fees in all of those cases. So if you're not using that service, or you would not be paying those fees to begin with. So general fund reserves, as I mentioned, the city council has a policy of 25% of annual general fund revenues. Fund balance or rainy day fund is designed to mitigate revenue shortfalls, unanticipated expenditures, and to kind of help us ensure some more stable tax rates. It's dependent on a variety of other factors unique to each community. And that includes what exposure you might have to one-time expenses. We've had a lot of those, whether it's sales tax refunds. We've had some property tax refunds related to dark store theory. Reliance on other funds, particularly those with debt service on sales tax revenues. We've done a really good job of segregating. And we have dedicated sales tax for streets and dedicated sales tax for parks and recreation. So we're not competing with general fund sales tax to take care of those priorities. And then the potential impact on bond ratings. The bond agencies and the city's bond rating is AA+. And we've consistently maintained that in large part because of our strong financial controls and our fund balance position. As I mentioned, the 2026 budget process, we began with a deficit position relative to our fund balance goal of 25%. I didn't include in this slide presentation, but we talked in several of the last meetings about if you look at revenues to expenditures exclusive of the dollars that we're transferring out of the general fund for street maintenance and for solid waste, we are generating more revenue than what we have in operating expenses. So it is the decision to transfer money out of the general fund, which is kind of adding to that imbalance that we've experienced. As we've seen with a lot of the things that we addressed up to this point, the deficit for 2025 is addressed by just reducing reserves from 25% to 22.5%, I think is where we've landed. We're far enough along in the year. We feel comfortable with revenue and expense estimates that that's a comfortable place to be. And then we started it in 2026 with about a $900,000 deficit, alleviated in part by the 3.5 mil increase, but also by the cuts and things that the departments have done and many other things that we've looked at. Next slide, please. So we will be back at this. The proposed budget does include us returning to that full 25% fund balance in 2026. This is just a look at general fund expenses. I think I got my pages. It's okay. That's fine. So every year, we don't do zero-based budgeting, but every year the departments go back and they evaluate all of the line items in their budget. And we look at all kinds of options and alternatives to bring the budget into balance. And those are included here. But as I mentioned, eliminating or combining positions, delaying purchase of capital equipment, eliminating or reducing specific budget line items. We budget in 4 categories: personnel, contractual services, commodities, and capital. And then we have the transfers, and the general fund transfers included in the proposed 2026 budget are $850,000 to the CIP fund for street maintenance. And that is a portion of the property tax. $100,000 to the solid waste utility to subsidize a portion of the citywide trash contract, and $110,000 to the equipment reserve and replacement fund for annual debt service on the 5 frontline police vehicles that were financed earlier this year. Next slide, please. Hopefully it's, I just missed one altogether. Go back one more. I'm missing a pie chart. Go back 2. There we go. So this is just expenses by function. And if you, this is kind of shows you, no surprise, public safety takes the largest share of, represents the largest share of expenses in the general fund at about 38%. Parks and Recreation second at 23%. Public Works at about 18%. Administration, which includes administration, legislative or the council's budget, and our general overhead, where we carry some fairly significant expenses such as insurance, property and casualty insurance premiums for the entire organization. It's about 13%, and then the community development department had about 8%. So actually the 2026 general fund expenses are 5% less than what we're estimating to where we're ending 2025, and they total about almost $14.8 million in the general fund. So now we can go to the one that says personnel. Total personnel costs in the 2026 general fund budget are 10.2 million, which is an 8.5% increase over the 2025 estimated. And so you might be saying, how did we decrease? And we increase it's because we've had corresponding decreases in contractuals, commodities, capital categories. Personnel costs represent about 64% of this draft general fund budget, including the transfers. And the target that we strive for is somewhere between 60 and 65%. So our goal is to keep employees appropriately aligned with both the external market and internal equity considerations. And as I mentioned, competition from both the public and private sector continues to present challenges in recruiting and retaining employees. So the council has been generous in approving increases for both full and part-time staff over the year. And as I mentioned, the 2026 budget does decrease full-time employees by 2. Supplemental requests are those things that outside of the normal operating programs and services that our departments will request. We essentially, because of the position that we've been in, have not included any of the supplemental requests in the 2026 budget. There are several high priority supplemental requests which are not included. And we will continue to keep an eye on those. We've sort of prioritized those. And if we do better than expected, we'll come back to you and recommend potentially bringing some of those back into the budget. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, one of the things that we've been really good at is leveraging outside resources. So from 2020 to 2026, we have leveraged over $21 million in federal, state, and county funds. The lion's share of that is for streets. And we will see in 2026 is when we will have the $6 million surface transportation grant that's coming from the federal level to redo Johnson Drive from Lamar to Metcalf. But then we have also taken advantage of Johnson County CARS program funding. So that's been really helpful and helping us catch up with street programs. Stormwater increased significantly because we are doing the Rock Creek Channel project in 2026. And we have upwards of $4.7 million in county stormwater dollars that will be coming into that. So we continue to look, as I mentioned, I'm just trying to be mindful of the time. So capital improvement program, next slide, please. And you can move on to the next one. So this is general fund, and then we really look at a 5-year capital improvement program where we bring in streets, stormwater, parks and recreation in particular. Most of those have some sort of dedicated revenue stream, which we'll touch on in just a moment. But these are the categories as we continue to build out and look at strengthening a capital improvement program. In the future, there are things like technology, public buildings and facilities, vehicles and equipment that could be part of that. We haven't rolled it all into sort of one document, but this is just kind of an idea of the assets and keeps us as a staff looking at where are we today, what threats or opportunities do we have in any of those categories, and then we're constantly rebalancing and reevaluating priorities. Next slide. So CIP, we carry the largest share of the city's debt in our capital improvement funds related to streets, parks, stormwater. And so you can see the debt summary for 2026, total principal and interest for 2026 is a little over $4 million. CIP principal and interest is 3.7 of that 4 million. General fund debt is just shown here to illustrate what we do carry, and there are just 2 debt service payments that we carry in the general fund. One is for the facility conservation improvements that were made in 2021 for primarily the community center and city hall, looking at energy efficiency improvements, and then the 2025A issue, which we completed this spring, and that from the general fund, we will be contributing debt service for 5 frontline police vehicles. And you may recall, we had traditionally been doing a lease purchase arrangement on those over a 4-year horizon. We were able to save dollars by rolling that into the debt that we were also issuing for the Johnson Drive and the Rock Creek Channel project. but we shortened up the repayment schedule for the vehicles to 4 years to match what we've done. There's no reason for us to stretch debt service on cars out over a 10-year horizon. So we really try, in some limited cases with stormwater, we had extended beyond 10 years, but typically we try to maintain a 10-year debt repayment horizon on any debt that we issue. And so you can kind of see outstanding debt at the end of 2026 citywide will be roughly $20 million. CIP program area revenue highlights. As I mentioned, we have stormwater utility fee that generates about $2.7 million that goes to fund stormwater, both creek channel, localized drainage issues. We also have special assessment revenues, particularly at the Gateway site, and then we have 2 drainage districts in the city that contribute to that. So, and then we have other revenues coming in 2026, primarily from the Johnson County Stormwater Program of over $4 million. On the street revenue side, we get a portion of the gas tax that's distributed to us from the state, a 3/8 cent retail sales tax that is dedicated to streets, and then the general fund mills that we transfer are dedicated to street maintenance. So our annual local revenues are about 2.6 million. In 2026, our other revenues will be 8.9 million, driven in large part by that $6 million federal grant. And then on the Parks and Recreation side, we have a 3/8 cent dedicated Parks and Recreation sales tax. And then we have 1/3 of the alcohol tax that is distributed to us that goes to a special Parks and Recreation fund. So local revenues are about 1.35 million. We have no grants or other revenues anticipated in the 2026 budget. So CIP program areas, the expenditure highlights, as I mentioned, on the stormwater side, we're going to be doing the Rock Creek Channel improvements from Maple to Woodson, localized maintenance projects throughout various neighborhoods in the city at about $600,000, and then stormwater debt service at about 2.3 million. On the street side, we anticipate spending over 15 million on streets. That would be our annual residential street maintenance program, the Johnson Drive project, miscellaneous curb, striping, et cetera, and then street debt service at $1 million annually. And then Parks and Recreation, the 2026 capital improvement program identifies about 1.696 million, looking at just maintenance items, particularly roof replacement, park maintenance, for the community center, MFAC, and then some portion of Parks and Recreation debt service. Next slide, please. Then we touched on some of the other more significant funds. As I mentioned, we have close to 20 funds that we're required to budget statutorily and keep those funds separate. We're not required from the state statute for those to be legally included in what we adopt. So several of these that are the larger funds, the MCBB fund is the fund where we have to account for the transient guest tax that we receive from our 1 hotel. That primarily supports the Mission Magazine and is dedicated funding to support our businesses. It's limited purpose in terms of spending that attracts visitors to our community. That may provide some resources for us for World Cup or 75th anniversary activities, both of which will be occurring in 2026.
Laura, I did just want to give you a 10-minute warning
Yep,
on time.
I'm
Yep.
trying to watch that. And we have to take pictures, so. TIF and CID funds, those are, we're required to establish separate funds to account for the specific redevelopment projects that we have. And expenses out of those funds are controlled exclusively by the development agreements that are in place and have been approved by the council. Special alcohol fund is again another 1/3 of that alcohol tax. We contribute about $70,000 to United Community Services for their substance use. To the Drug and Alcoholism Council, they provide grants. And then about $90,000 supports our mental health co-responder programming. And then the Solid Waste Utility Fund, we're anticipating a 3% increase in the 2026 contract. The city will absorb all of that. Recommendation at this point is to maintain the resident rate the same for 2026. Next slide. Lucky for you, I didn't have Justin here to help me with key performance areas. So you'll remember that we established 5 key performance areas and value statements, looking at sort of anticipated goals and objectives. Because the budget is still in a little bit of a state of flux, we'll come back. Typically what we will do, and when we come to you in September, we will take the expenses and we will assign those to the key performance areas so we can talk about how much money is being spent. I think it's pretty obvious that every year, and again, this year from what we've seen in this presentation, infrastructure investment is going to be a big, really big part of that, as it should be. And then how do you stay connected is the next slide, really the different ways that you can follow us, participate in the meetings, get the budget materials. And then, as I mentioned, we will have our specific public hearing and budget adoption on September 17th here at in the city council chambers at 7 p.m. Be happy to answer any questions or if there are any members of the audience.
Yep. I think for the sake of the time, I'll open it up for any questions or comments from the public. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes. If you have a comment or question, please raise your hand and we'll call on you to come to the lectern and state your name and city of residence for the record. You said no comments online, Robin? I don't see any hands in our, oh, yep, one hand in our in-person group. If you want to come to the lectern and say your name and city of residence.
Hi, my name is Grant Glenn. I'm a neighbor of Ben's. I moved here in 2017 to retire. I've been a Democrat since Ronald Reagan was elected president, and I haven't ever voted against a bond issue. Saying that, I am disturbed by the percentage increase that is anticipated in the mill levy. I think the valuation increase is 4%, is what she said. Mission, the county was 6.5%. Mine were over 10%, and that's been aggressive for the last several years. I think the city should try to live on those increases. I'm not naive enough to think that you don't have increases in your costs and that you're going to have to meet those somehow. But when the assessment is going beyond that and significantly beyond that, I think in the 25% to 30% range is what my budget sheet said. I think that's wrong. It's not. Can't be supported over the long term. If you get a big bite out of the apple this year, you're going to have people. You're going to have a lot more than one person here next year about doing this year after year. And I'm not trying to be threatening. I appreciate the work that you do. My late wife was on the school board for over 10 years. And I recognize that you're not compensated and that all you do is take abuse and very little compliments. But I do think it's important for you to remember that those of us that are living on Social Security or other forms of limited income have to figure out a way to make this work. And if we can withstand the increase in the home values, that's asking a lot. And then when you add more taxes on top of that, that's asking really for too much. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comments? Seeing none, any comments or questions from council? Yeah, Wanda?
I have heard from a constituent also who is very concerned about the increase. And according to him, he got, I have a statement here. He's saying that there was a 38% increase. And I'm not quite sure that matches with what I'm hearing.
Yeah, it's going to vary, and I'd be happy if you have a specific copy of the notices that was sent out by the county. I can help interpret that.
Okay.
They're somewhat confusing, I think, in general. But when we tried to look at through this process, the impact on the average home. We can calculate that. And so that's going to vary. So if your home is valued, which many of our homes are in Mission at more than that $350,000, then that percentage increase will be larger. And I think we shared, and I can reshare something from the appraiser's office. I think we shared it in maybe back, all the way back in April, in looking at of all of the properties in Mission, how many went down in value, how many stayed the same, how many went up by, certain percentage ranges. So we can certainly, bring that back again as well.
Yeah, Leah, then Debbie.
I had asked this earlier, but I just wanted to make sure. So did the county or anyone else decide to increase property tax this go around?
The county is not, I believe, Consolidated Fire, I need to update that now that Consolidated Fire District is increasing. Westwood, City of Westwood is increasing or proposed a 4 mil increase. Obviously, that doesn't impact our Mission residents, but the Consolidated Fire District would. I need to sort through the notices. I think they were a little later coming out this year than they have been in the past, so I haven't had as much time to sort of dive into and be able to digest that. But we can do that certainly for the September.
Laura, that
Meetings.
matches my notices. Consolidated Fire is up, everybody else is
Everybody else is-
roughly flat.
Roughly flat. I don't think you had as many rollbacks across Johnson County as we have seen in recent years.
So the increase to people's, I guess, tax bill at the end of the day would be the increase in their property value and then the mill levies that we're discussing and
Yes.
the consolidated fire department, but no one else is making
Yeah.
a move to increase.
So, and part of that, if we maintain the same mill levy that we had, not revenue neutral, but if we maintain the same 18.507 mill levy that funds the 2025 budget and your house increases in value, you still have an increase in your property taxes.
Yeah, Debbie.
I just want to add, one of the things that was mentioned at the last council meeting or the work session was the fact that 50% of the people who are fined and ticketed are not paying their bills. I want to look at the emphasis on increasing fees, especially DUIs. It's not fair to the public at large to pay for the consequences of people who are not making good choices. Secondly, eventually, we may have to start looking at the sharing of big ticket equipment. And we've got such small cities around that that's an option at some point down the road. I just think we need to start looking broadly at where we can cut back and where we have an emphasis on the constituents at hand. Thanks.
Ben, did I see a hand down there?
Yeah. Yeah, largely, I agree with everything that's been set up here and by Mr. Glenn, my neighbor. Again, I'll repeat what Laura said is that we don't take mill increases lightly by any means. At the end of this, something that really just grabs my attention and holds on to it is that we've had this roughly $1 million or so in sales and use tax refunds over the last few years, and lo and behold, that's the deficit we're looking at in our budget. I'm not here to say whether these sales and use tax refunds are fair or right or what they are. But what they are is very difficult for us to forecast and very opaque for us to analyze and look at what's happening. And, they happen, months to years after the fact of we've already collected the money and spent it before anybody tells us that this is going to be refunded, and very little information about why the funds are refunded. In general, it leaves me with a taste that some of the larger taxpayers, especially commercial taxpayers, have the resources to fight their tax bills. And my view is that what we're seeing here in this budget is that when that happens, these are shifted onto residential taxpayers pretty much directly, one for one. Something to think about. I certainly am in conversation with my state representatives about it, and I encourage the same for anybody else that sees the issue the same as I do.
And in particular, in this case, the biggest impacts we felt are from a for-profit utility who can claim an exemption, correct? On the
Both from
refunds.
sales and use tax and from property tax.
Yeah.
So I think the number is, and I'll verify, but I think we hover somewhere between 18 to 20% of our value in the community is exempt property. So when you look at the county offices, churches, schools, AT&T, wastewater treatment plant, you look at all the cranes that are up there, and we are going to get the benefit of the millions of dollars worth of investment, at least to our assessed value, right? We get the benefit in other ways. But that has an impact in 2.5 square miles when you have that much property that is exempt from paying taxes.
And before I forget, I just wanted to mention, I know it's sort of tight and uncertain looking at the public safety county sales tax renewal that we're all unsure about. But I still am in favor of a pretty critical look at offsetting some of the mill rate with sales tax dollars if it's at all possible. I know at this point it's quite the squeeze, but anything helps.
Yeah. And I did want to flag too, I know it was in the slides, but there's a lot of material you covered, Laura, especially as we're talking about, fixed incomes and some of our residents who might have a more difficult time facing, any increase, whether that's from a growth in valuation or an increase in the mill levy, is those tax support programs that we do have for the local portion of the tax, which is now moved from 50% of the average median income to qualify to 65%. Is that right? 65% of the average median income to qualify. And so just would really encourage folks to take a look at that program, or to, contact your elected officials up here or staff at City Hall if you think you may qualify, because in my view, I think we're facing a lot of challenges in terms of rising costs, but I would rather see us try to, make some adjustments to be able to continue to deliver on the services that all of our residents say, they want and need, and to really look at that more targeted relief for those who might need support, rather than across the board constraint on our mill levy that's going to put us in a bad place with our streets, with being able to fund and keep, police officers, all of those sorts of expenses that we see costs continue to rise. Yeah, Leah?
Same vein. I just really want us to get the information out to the community that these rebate programs are available. I had been speaking with a friend of mine whose mother lives in Mission, and it took me a minute to find it on more than a minute to find it on the website. Yeah, I'd never really looked for it before, but just really getting the word out, because I too worry about those people that are on fixed income that, chose to live here through their retirement age in place, being able to afford to stay in their home without having to make changes at that point in time in their life.
Wanda?
Yeah, does the county also have a program where they help people that have fixed
Yes.
incomes? I thought that.
But I don't know if you can stack. I can't ever remember where
Yeah, I can't,
your rules came
every
out, but we can double check
jurisdiction that has a program sort of has their own eligibility rules, and I can't remember on the county.
Plus, I just wanted to know, how many properties do we have that are not paying taxes, property taxes that are? How many?
who are not or exempt from paying or delinquent.
No, delinquent.
I mean, it's really impossible unless we,
So So does that mean we're going to get that money?
no, that's eventually, or some portion of it.
Eventually after 5 years, no one paid their taxes, then they opt to foreclose on the property, they basically sell it in county courthouse steps. Try to get some taxes back.
But it's not going to be an appreciable amount.
Not necessarily. And again, it's that time frame, and we have no control to accelerate a time frame
Yeah.
for repayment of that.
Or if the property was privately sold prior to a foreclosure sale, then the new owner would be responsible for any arrears on the
Correct.
tax bill, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
the person that,
The new purchaser, yeah, would have to pay it back. Yeah.
we are really in some very, I mean, we just really are in some very unsecure, I mean, we cannot gauge anything. It's really very crazy times. And I also would not like to have a great mill increase, but I enjoy those nice parks that we have now, and I enjoy that new street that I have. And so it's that balancing act is just, it's really hard. That's all I got to say. I don't want to do it.
I think what I might suggest is, since we're past 7 o'clock
Yep.
now, we can certainly, under council discussion or comments, if there's anything else or any direction you want to provide additional information that you want staff to bring back to the September committee meetings, we can certainly pick it
Great.
up then.
Thank you. Does that conclude your remarks?
That
Nicole?
concludes my remarks.
Well, all right, with that, we will go ahead and conclude our work session. Thank you.